Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going on a journey to uncover the ideas of William of Ockham. This 14th century thinker really shook things up. And get this, his thinking wasn't just radical back then, it still echoes through history and even shapes how we think about science today.
It's fascinating that Ockham was a Franciscan friar, a man of faith, yet he dared to challenge the core beliefs of his time. He was kind of a rebel in robes, wouldn't you say?
Totally. He went up against big names like John Duns Scotus. Our sources even call him the father of nominalism. What does that even mean? It sounds kind of intimidating.
It was a revolutionary concept. Nominalism basically says that abstract ideas like humanity or beauty, those things philosophers call universals, they don't actually exist as separate things. Ockham was adamant, only individual things are real.
So instead of some big idea of chairness that all chairs share, they're just individual chairs, each one unique.
Precisely. And you know what? This seemingly simple idea had huge implications. It totally changed how people understood the world and categorized things.
Okay, before we dive too deep into abstract concepts, let's step back for a second. Can you paint us a picture of William of Ockham as a person? Who was he beyond the philosophy and radical ideas?
Well, he was born in the late 13th century in England. Ockham was a Franciscan friar, known for his sharp mind. He wasn't afraid to jump into heated debates and challenge established figures. In fact, he even got into hot water with the church for some of his views.
Oh, that sounds juicy. We'll have to get to that later. But first, let's talk about this Occam's razor thing.
Uh-huh.
It sounds kind of dangerous.
It's not dangerous at all. It's a principle of simplicity. It's actually one of Occam's most famous contributions. It's the idea that when you have multiple explanations for something, the one with the fewest assumptions is probably the most accurate.
So it's like a mental decluttering tool. Keep it simple, and you're closer to the truth.
Exactly. It's a timeless way to cut through all the noise and get to the core of an issue. And the amazing part is it's still super relevant today. Scientists use it to design experiments. Detectives use it to solve crimes. It's a powerful tool for anyone who wants to think clearly.
Can you give us a real-world example? How would Occam's razor work in a situation we might face?
Well, imagine you can't find your keys. One explanation is you just misplaced them somewhere in your house. Another is that a mischievous fairy snuck in and hid them. Which one seems more likely based on what you know about the world?
Okay, I see your point. The mischievous fairy is a bit far-fetched. It's probably more likely that I just need to retrace my steps. But how does this connect to his bigger ideas?
It really reflects his whole approach to knowledge. Occam was all about stripping away unnecessary assumptions and focusing on what you can actually observe. It's the same approach he used to reject universals, those abstract concepts that dominated medieval philosophy.
So he was all about grounding knowledge in real, tangible experiences, not theoretical concepts.
Exactly. And this leads us to another really interesting part of his thinking, his views on God and what he called contingent things.
Let's unpack that. What did Occam have to say about the divine and how it relates to us?
He believed that God is the only necessary being, meaning God's existence is self-evident. It doesn't depend on anything else. But everything else in creation, that's what he called contingent.
Contingent meaning?
Meaning it depends on something else for its existence. Occam believed that everything we experience ultimately relies on God for its being.
So are you saying that we're all connected but not directly to each other? Our main connection is to God, and that's what gives us existence.
Yes, you've got it. And because of this dependence on God, Occam believed that individual things have no real connection to each other, only to the divine. This ties back to his rejection of universals. If everything ultimately comes from God, there's no need for those big unifying concepts.
This is starting to feel like a big puzzle. His ideas about individual things, God, and his rejection of universals all fit together. But this had to be a pretty radical view for his time, right? Challenging those core beliefs couldn't have been easy.
You're right, it wasn't. In fact, his emphasis on experience as the basis of knowledge was groundbreaking, and it caused a lot of controversy.
Now we're getting to the good stuff.
It gets even more interesting. Occam truly believed that real knowledge comes from observation and evidence. This was a revolutionary concept, and it actually planted the seeds for the scientific revolution centuries later.
So he was like a philosophical trailblazer for figures like Galileo and Newton, paving the way for their focus on experiments and observation.
Yes, in many ways he was. His emphasis on direct experience and minimizing assumptions was a radical shift from how most people thought about knowledge back then.
It's incredible how one person's ideas can have such a huge impact on history. But wait, didn't we mention earlier that Occam had some trouble with the church? What exactly went down?
Well, his ideas were seen as a direct challenge to the church's authority and its traditional beliefs. Imagine saying that universals don't exist when so much of church doctrine relied on those very concepts.
Uh-oh, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. He was stepping on some toes, wasn't he?
He definitely was. And it didn't help that he also questioned the church's political power. He was a big advocate for the separation of church and state, which we take for granted today. But back in the 14th century, that was a very radical idea.
So he wasn't just a philosophical rebel, but a political one too. No wonder he faced accusations of heresy. Talk about standing up for your beliefs.
His story really highlights how groundbreaking ideas often come with a price. But despite the controversy, his influence on Western thought is undeniable. His legacy is truly immense.
Speaking of his legacy, what impact did this razor-wielding, universal-smashing friar have on the world? We've touched upon it, but I'm curious to hear more specifics.
His ideas had a lasting impact on Western thought. They shaped science, political philosophy, and even ideas about individual liberty. It's amazing how his thinking, coming from a medieval world, still resonates with us today.
That's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground. Occam's background, his famous razor, and his views on universals and the divine. Now let's explore how those ideas spread through history and left their mark on our world.
I'm excited to explore that further with you. Be sure to join us in the next part where we'll unpack how Occam's thought shaped Western intellectual history and continues to influence us to this day.
Welcome back to our exploration of William of Occam's world. It's amazing to think how this 14th century friar's ideas are still so relevant today.
I know, right? It's remarkable how Occam's impact wasn't just in philosophy. It spread to science, politics, the whole idea of individual liberty.
This whole idea of Occam as a proto-scientist really fascinates me. What about his thinking set the stage for the scientific revolution? Did he, do experiments or something?
Well, not experiments in the way we think of them today, but his focus on experience as the basis for knowledge. That was huge. Back then, most knowledge came from ancient philosophers or religious texts, you know?
Right, so instead of just taking their word for it, Occam was all about observing the world firsthand and drawing conclusions from what he saw.
Exactly. That shift paved the way for the scientific method we use today. You know, the one based on observation, experimentation, testing ideas against real data. It's about looking for evidence, not just accepting pronouncements.
So basically, Occam was saying, show me the proof. It sounds so simple, but it was a radical idea at the time.
Absolutely. And it's a cornerstone of modern science. Imagine our world today without evidence-based thinking. It's pretty mind-blowing how this one seemingly simple shift changed our understanding of the world.
It's like he laid the foundation for how we approach knowledge. But how did this actually influence specific scientific advancements? Can you give us an example?
Well, think about Isaac Newton, a giant of the scientific revolution. His law of universal gravitation, that whole idea about objects attracting each other, revolutionary. But it was built on centuries of observation and experiments, a process that Occam's emphasis on evidence helped to start.
So from how planets move to how an apple falls from a tree, it's all about observing and testing, right?
Exactly. But it wasn't only science that Occam influenced. His ideas had a huge impact on political philosophy, too. His questioning of authority, religious and secular, really made people rethink power and how we govern ourselves.
That makes sense. If you question the church, why not question the king, too? It's like a domino effect.
Right. His skepticism towards those big systems of thought and his focus on individual experience naturally led to questions about who holds power and why.
Did he actually get involved in any political movements, or was it mostly theory?
He was definitely vocal about separating church and state, a radical idea for his time. He believed the church shouldn't hold political power and individuals should have the right to govern themselves, free from outside influence.
Wow. That's incredible. We're still grappling with these ideas today. He was way ahead of his time.
He truly was, and those ideas of individual freedom and limited government really resonated with thinkers throughout history. John Locke, a major figure in the Enlightenment, drew on a lot of Occam's ideas, and Locke's work went on to influence modern democracies. It's amazing to see that lineage of thought.
So it wasn't just theory. His ideas had a real impact on how societies were structured and governed.
Definitely. And that focus on individual experience also helped people recognize individual rights and freedoms. It's like he helped shift the focus from the group to the individual, laying the groundwork for a society based on rights, not just the collective.
It's fascinating how these threads, science, politics, individual liberty, all come back to Occam. He was a true pioneer.
It really shows how powerful ideas can be, They cross boundaries and shape history. Sometimes just one spark can start a whole fire of change.
It sounds like even though his biggest impact came later, he still stirred things up while he was alive.
Oh, definitely. He was controversial, a real thorn in the side of the establishment. His ideas resonated with people who were already questioning authority and wanted more autonomy. Pretty amazing how this one friar, tucked away in a monastery, could spark such big debates.
Can you give us an example of how his ideas played out in real life during his lifetime? How did he actually rock the boat, so to speak?
Well, one interesting example is the conflict between Pope John XXII and the Franciscan order. Ockham, being a Franciscan friar, was right in the middle of it. The Franciscans, they believed in poverty and simplicity, which clashed with the Pope's lavish lifestyle and his claims to political power.
Ah, so it was more than just theology. It was a power struggle, a clash over wealth within the church itself.
Exactly. And Occam's ideas about separating church and state, along with his criticisms of the church's wealth, were incredibly relevant to this whole conflict.
So he wasn't just writing about this stuff, he was living it.
Precisely. His writings and arguments gave support to those who were already critical of the Pope, which fueled the debate and highlighted those tensions within the church.
It's inspiring to see him put his principles into action, even when it meant going up against powerful figures. Talk about standing up for what you believe in.
It really shows his courage and the power of ideas to inspire action. And as we've seen, those actions can have ripple effects that last far beyond a single lifetime.
I have to say, my admiration for William of Ockham just went up a notch. He wasn't just a brilliant thinker. He was a man of action who actually fought for what he believed in.
Absolutely. That's what makes his story so compelling. A brilliant mind who wasn't afraid to challenge authority and whose ideas still resonate today.
Yeah, I'm curious. If Ockham were alive today, walking around in the 21st century, what would he think of our modern world? Would he be impressed, horrified, or maybe a bit of both?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's impossible to know for sure, but we can use what we know about him to imagine how he might react to our advancements and all the dilemmas we face today.
Let's do it. Let's put on our imagination hats and picture Ockham in the 21st century. What would he make of our scientific progress? Would he be blown away by our technology?
Oh, I think he'd be fascinated by how far we've come in understanding the natural world. Remember, he was all about observation, so he'd probably love our ability to observe distant galaxies, manipulate genes, explore the human brain. It's incredible.
I could just picture him geeking out over the James Webb Space Telescope, sending back those amazing images from the edge of space. It'd be like a dream come true for someone who valued observation as much as he did.
For sure. But while he might celebrate our achievements, I don't think he'd shy away from pointing out the potential downsides. He was always cautious about human fallibility and the dangers of unchecked power.
Ah, right. Progress has a dark side, too. It's like we've unlocked this incredible potential, but we haven't always figured out how to use it responsibly.
That's exactly it. He'd probably be concerned about things like algorithms making life-altering decisions or big corporations knowing more about us than we do ourselves. It's easy to see how those situations could lead to abuses of power.
And with his passion for open debate, he probably wouldn't be too thrilled about how technology can be used to manipulate information and sway public opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I think he'd be troubled by echo chambers and the spread of misinformation online. It's a real problem.
It's like the digital age gave us these amazing tools, but also created new challenges. It's harder than ever to tell what's true.
And that's where Occam's idea of critical thinking is so important. I think he would tell us to be very careful, to question everything we see and hear, and to seek out diverse perspectives.
So how do we cultivate that Occam-inspired skepticism when we're bombarded with information from all sides? It's so easy to just go with whatever seems most convincing or fits with what we already believe.
It's tough, but I think Occam would offer some timeless advice. First, be aware of your own biases. Recognize that you have preconceived notions, and those can influence how you see things.
So take a moment to say, okay, what am I bringing to this? How are my own beliefs affecting my perception?
Exactly. Then, look for information from different sources. Don't just rely on one news outlet or social media feed. Look for diverse perspectives, even those that challenge your views.
It's about getting the whole picture, right?
Right. Then, you have to evaluate those sources. Who's giving you this information? What's their agenda? Are they using credible evidence? You have to ask the tough questions to figure out what's real and what's not.
So it's not about rejecting everything. It's about being skeptical and looking for evidence. like being a truth detective.
That's it. I also think Ockham would want us to have respectful dialogues with people who have different views. He believed that debate is crucial for finding truth.
So it's not about silencing opposing views, but engaging with them thoughtfully, even when we disagree.
Precisely. It's about listening, trying to understand, and being open to changing our minds when there's good evidence.
Wow, this has been quite a journey. We've gone from medieval philosophy to modern science, political theory, and even the ethical issues we face today.
It's amazing, isn't it? These intellectual giants offer new perspectives, challenge our assumptions, and inspire us to think more deeply about our lives and the world around us.
But you mentioned earlier that Occam might have some concerns about the modern world, even with all our advancements.
Yes, he was a brilliant mind, but also very cautious and thoughtful. I think he'd definitely point out some areas where we might be going wrong.
So in our final segment, let's explore those potential downsides of progress. What do you think would keep William of Ockham up at night if he were alive today?
That's a great question. Get ready to put on your Occam thinking caps as we delve into the challenges we face in a world shaped by his very own ideas.
Welcome back to the show. This deep dive into William of Ockham's world has been quite a ride. From medieval times to modern science, his ideas are still making waves.
It's a testament to the power of critical thinking. That Occam-style focus on questioning assumptions and looking for evidence. That's so important today, especially with all the complexity and rapid change in our world.
But you hinted earlier that Occam might have some reservations about our modern world,
Yeah.
even with all the progress we've made. What downsides do you think he might have predicted?
Well, remember, Occam wasn't all about embracing experience and observation. He was deeply concerned about ethical issues, too. He recognized that even the brightest minds can be biased, and even well-intentioned actions can have unintended consequences.
So it's like we've achieved so much, but we don't always know how to handle it responsibly. That dark side of progress, right?
Exactly. I think Occam would be particularly worried about knowledge or technology being concentrated in the hands of just a few. It could lead to abuses of power or a disregard for individual rights. He was a big advocate for individual liberty and limited government, after all.
That makes a lot of sense. I bet he'd be concerned about things like algorithms making decisions that impact people's lives, or powerful companies having more information about us than we do ourselves. Those scenarios could easily become examples of power without accountability.
Absolutely. I think he'd also be worried about technology being used to manipulate information and influence public opinion. He was all about reasoned debate and open discussion, so the rise of echo chambers and misinformation online would probably really trouble him.
It's like we have these incredible communication tools, but now it's even harder to tell what's true.
It's true. This is where Occam's emphasis on critical thinking is so crucial. I think he'd tell us to stay vigilant, question what we see and hear, and seek out different perspectives.
But how do we cultivate that kind of skepticism, that Occam-inspired approach, in a world where we're bombarded with information from all directions? It's so easy to just accept whatever seems convincing or already aligns with what we think.
It's a real challenge. But I think Occam would give us some timeless advice. First, be aware of your own biases. Recognize that you have preconceived ideas, and those can really shape how you see things.
So it's about taking a step back and asking yourself, okay, what baggage am I bringing to this? How are my beliefs affecting how I'm seeing this situation?
Exactly. And then try to find information from various sources. Don't rely on just one news outlet or social media feed. You've got to look for diverse perspectives, even those that challenge your own.
You need to get the whole picture, not just a narrow slice.
You got it. And then really evaluate those sources. Ask yourself, who's presenting this? What's their motive? Are they using solid evidence? Ask those tough questions to separate truth from fiction.
So it's not about rejecting everything outright, but about using a healthy dose of skepticism and looking for evidence, like being a detective for the truth.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I also think Occam would encourage us to have respectful conversations with people who have different viewpoints. He believed that honest debate is essential for finding the truth.
That means not shutting down opposing views, but engaging with them thoughtfully, even when we disagree.
Yes, that's it. It's about listening, trying to understand, and being open to changing our minds when presented with strong evidence.
Wow, this deep dive into William of Ockham has really given me a lot to consider. It's not just history and philosophy, it's about applying those ideas to our lives today to become more thoughtful and discerning.
It's so fascinating to explore these great thinkers, isn't it? They give us new ways of looking at things, challenge what we think we know, and inspire us to live more intentionally.
So to wrap up, what's the main message you hope our listeners will take away from this exploration of William of Ockham?
I want them to remember that Occam's legacy isn't just about his razor or a set of philosophical ideas. It's about a way of thinking, a commitment to critical inquiry, a willingness to challenge assumptions, and a deep concern for the ethics of our actions. It's about being curious and discerning.
In a world full of information overload, complexity, and competing narratives, that message couldn't be more timely, right?
You're absolutely right. So next time you're facing a tough decision or a complicated issue, think of William of Ockham. Ask yourself, what are the basic facts? What assumptions are being made? And most importantly, what are the ethical consequences of my choices?
It's about embracing that spirit of questioning and using our knowledge and critical thinking skills to make the world a better place. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep using your minds to make the world a more thoughtful and just place.